Hi, everyone. I'm Karen MacNeil, author of the Wine Bible and editor of the digital newsletter Wine Speed. And this is Napa Valley Sessions, the kickoff event for Premiere Napa Valley, which starts right now and goes to the end of the week. Tonight, we'll be looking at three vintages, the 2019, 2020, and 2021. And we are so excited you're here. You know, dramatic events are nothing new in the Napa Valley. And these 3 years were something of a roller coaster, as we're about to discuss. Let me tell you who is here with me tonight. Jessica Koger is the winemaker for Schramsberg and Davies Vineyards. Jessica, welcome. There she is. Andy Erickson is co-owner and winemaker of Favia and consulting winemaker for a number of other Napa Valley estates. Andy's jumping on right now. Weston Edison, is the owner and winemaker of Silver Ghost Winery. Welcome. And Marla Carroll is the winemaker for Antinore Antica Estate. Welcome, Marla. All right, thanks everybody for joining me. Let me say to all of our viewers too, I see everyone is already beginning to chat away. That's great. And if you have a question that you'd like me to pose to one of our panelists, then please just write it in the Q&A box, and we'll see if we can take some toward the end of this broadcast. So let's start with the 2019s. Before we talk about what the year was like, those wines are coming onto the market now, and I wonder how each of you would characterize those wines, just in a few words or in a sentence. So the 2019 wines, Jessica, what would you say?
For us, I'd say they had phenomenal acid, great tension, and this very, a gracefulness about them that we haven't seen in a little bit, at least on our home estate. So we quite enjoyed them.
Wow, nice. We're going to talk about tension a little bit later in the show. Weston, how about for you? How would you characterize the 2019s?
Very textural, opulent wines, just layered too, just kind of layers keep coming in a really kind of classic Napa profile. Yeah. Approachable as well. I mean, they'll age, but they're approachable. So like that.
All right. Marla?
Ours had really good concentration, incredible color. They're beautiful wines. They have pretty big tannin and structure as compared to the 2018 vintage, which for us had a little bit more finesse. So I think they're a little bit more powerful and age worthy, but just a really beautiful vintage for us.
All right, great. And Andy?
You know, the word I've been using is energy. I just think the wines have such a high energy. I'll agree with Jessica that there's a tension to the wine. There's, they are rich and they're classic Napa Valley, but there's this lift and this real high energy that I really like in the 2019s.
Okay. 2019 was, of course, a warm year and a dry year, not as dry as 2021 when we talk about that year. But there were really warm days. And I wonder, and with climate change, perhaps more warm days in our collective future as well. I wonder, and this is a bit of a big question, but I wonder how winemakers, how each of you, cope with warmth so that your wines are ripe but not overripe. Anyone want to take that? Just, I know it's a big question, but I'm wondering some of the things you can do to keep a really warm year in check a little bit and ensure that the wine that you make is not overripe.
I'll take that one. I think it's just a year-round effort now in terms of, training the vineyards to look deep for water and changing our irrigation techniques so that we're giving deep waterings and less frequent waterings, and so that the vines can really handle the heat, and also changing the trellis system to have a little more coverage on the fruit. And then for me, it's harvesting earlier. I mean, I used to not think about harvesting until after the 1st of September, but I think you have to be out there keeping an eye on things in the month of August now and be ready to go, because there's a window to capture those flavors, and if you wait too long, you miss it.
Yeah, yeah. Who else wants to jump in on this?
I'll go. I mean,
Yeah,
for
please.
us, I mean, we're hillside, east facing on Diamond Mountain. And so there's some parts of our property that are well shaded from, the forest surrounding the vineyards. And then there's other areas that are a lot more exposed. And in those areas, maybe the soil is a little bit more sandy, there's not quite as much canopy. So, we're using things like shade cloth to sort of help the vineyard, cope with those hot days, with those sunny days, without collapsing. And, because we're on a hillside, even if we, were to water, a little bit, at a time, which is what we have to do because, it's going to roll downhill. So those little sips is, getting that vineyard well established from the get-go, and then those little sips throughout, to keep them in this sort of marathon that is a great harvest season. Doing what we can on that front.
Yeah, shade cloth, now a very common sight in the Napa Valley, and 15 years ago, you almost never saw it. Marla, would you, or Weston, would you like to jump in on this?
Yeah, we just had a discussion this morning about purchasing shade cloth for the upcoming vintage, which we haven't used in the past, but we really feel we're going to have to start using it because, especially after 2021, where we had a drought year with, where we had to pick, and again, like what Andy was saying, picking early and being okay with picking and just kind of getting the date out of your head and just focusing on the vine and the way it looks. And again, in the early days, it was all about vertical shoot positioning. And I think now a lot more people are okay with, letting the shoots flop, having dappled light, leaving the leaves, not stripping off the leaves, and giving more water, not being afraid to add water when the vines really need it. And just paying attention to the vine.
Yeah. Weston, want to jump in?
And kind of like what Andy is saying as well, just the row orientations might change, and replantings and other aspects might become that maybe weren't thought about so much in the past. Might be more. There's so many different topographies in Napa Valley. Just changing the aspect in vineyards really, or and where you would think to plant is something that's going to come as well.
Something like shade cloth is of course an extra expense for wineries now, but of course leaf pulling was an expense too. Maybe it all works out in the end. But I'm struck by the fact that compared to the 1970s and the 1980s, when winemakers often stayed in the cellar and viticulturalists were out in the field. Now, if you're a winemaker, boy, you are out in those vineyards all the time, in part because of issues is like sun. You have to be in the environment yourself, don't you?
Absolutely, it's true.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, the saying, great wines are made in the vineyard. It's maybe a little overstated, but it's very true. I mean, that's the raw ingredients, and you need to have the best raw ingredients to make the best wine. So that's your time is best spent out there for sure.
All right, well, let's go to the 2020 vintage. Wow, what a year. Right. As everyone who is joining us will remember, of course, as the growing season began, COVID was sweeping the country. Tasting rooms in the Napa Valley closed, but bare bones production staffs were still in the vineyards and cellars. And things seemed like you could keep going that way until in August, 2 wildfires hit, one in August and then the second in September. It was 2020, the largest wildfire season in the entire state of California for all of recorded modern history. But Napa Valley is incredibly diverse. And so as we all know, everything hinged on where you were, the topography of your vineyard, the altitude, wind direction. Andy, you make wine in many parts of the valley. What's your take on the 2020 vintage and the wines? How are they tasting?
Well, I think you hit it on the head that it depended on where you were. I mean, obviously vineyards that were right there next to where the fire was burning, didn't make wine. We were very methodical about it because of the timing, the grapes were not ready yet. So we did a lot of small scale fermentations. We did a lot of studying of what would happen if we made wine. But when we did decide to make the wines, we just went all in and we made the wines the way we would have in a normal year, keeping the pressed wine separate and keeping a lot of small fractions separate and all that. But I think the wines that have made it to this point and that are going into a bottle are just delicious. I mean, it was a dry year. It was obviously a very warm year. So the wines are dark and rich. And I mean, I'm presenting a wine right now from 2020, so we'll taste it. But I'm very happy with the wines. I think, I think in the Napa Valley, we probably made less than half of the wine we normally would have. But I think at this point, when things have been called out and pared down over the last 18 months, I'm pretty excited about a lot of the wines that are going to be bottled. So I'm bullish, though. People who know me know I'm bullish on Napa Valley. So,
well, Jessica, you made excuse me, you made wine as well. The options were no wine at all, make wine, make some wine, some varieties and not others. But I believe you made wine that year as well. What was your take?
Yeah, so we were lucky in that, we hadn't picked our Pinots yet, red Pinot project for the Davies Vineyards yet, but before the August fires hit, we were able to get them in well before the September fires came through, and those are perfect. And then we managed to pick about 14 tons of Cabernet, a little bit from our estate, a little bit from one of our growers in Calistoga before the glass fire struck. And luckily for us, at least, our winery for the Davies Vineyards winery is in St. Helena. So while we weren't able to get up to the estate vineyards in Calistoga, the winemaking end of it was safely tucked away in the heart of St. Helena. So the 14 tons, we're going to make 2, maybe 3 different wines and produce those, and we'll see where we go.
Yeah. Weston, I think you did not make wine in 2020. Is that right?
Well, I mean, very little, and the Cabernet, we're still kind of seeing if it's going to be released or not. But I do some sparkling wine as well, so it kind of gave me a window to what this vintage had to offer early on, and it was looking good and tasting really good. So for those who are fortunate enough to make their cabs, I agree that people that put it out there and put their name on it, it's going to be a good product. That vintage had all the bones of really good wine. So looking forward to trying more of them myself.
Yeah, this is an important point. Marla, I'll get to you in a second, but the idea that you might lose a vintage, but what you cannot afford to lose is your reputation, right? That everyone I've spoken to has said if they had any concern at all, they just simply didn't make wine. But if they didn't have a concern, they did go ahead because it in fact was a good year, except for those fires. Marla, I know you made some wines. I think you made whites, right?
Yeah, we bottled our Sauvignon Blanc and our Chardonnay and a little bit of Pinot Noir. And we're very pleased. I think any winemaker who put wine in a bottle for 2020 or is about to put wine in a bottle, it's something to be incredibly proud of, because I mean, just all around, everyone worked so hard for that vintage. So.
And in fact, a lot of reports are that 2020 will become an incredible collector's item, in part because the wines were so beautiful that were made, and that there's not very many of them. And so it's going to be interesting to watch that. Let's talk about smoke taint for just a second. I would be remiss not to bring that up because several people, when they registered, said that they were interested in smoke taint. And, it seems to me there's so many unknowns. How close did you need to be to the fire? What was the density of smoke? If the grapes were exposed for a short period of time, how short was short or how long was long? It seems like research is only beginning to work its way through some of the answers to those questions. Andy, what's your take? How is a winemaker to know?
Well, I think, thankfully, and let's knock on wood, it's not something that we've had to study a lot in the past, and hopefully it'll be years before we have to have a year like that again. But a lot of the reading and research that we looked at was from Australia. They've had to deal with it quite a bit. And the more I read, the more I realized that there's just a lot of unknowns. And then talking to Roger Bolton, who, when I went to UC Davis, he was my advisor and my professor, and I have a great relationship with him. And he told me, like, how can we even know that they're measuring the right things? People are maybe not even looking at the right compounds. And so, we learned a lot. I think what we learned was some of these varieties have levels of those markers in them naturally. Cabernet Franc, Syrah, Petite Bardot. If you measure wine from a clean vintage, those markers are there. Same with the wine that's been aged in barrel for 18, 20 months. Some of the wines I sent in from the 2019 vintage, just to have a sort of a benchmark, had higher numbers than the 2020 wines that we were looking at that had never been in oak. So it was kind of perplexing, and luckily winemaking moves very slowly. And so we've been able to continue to measure things, continue to taste the wines. And I think, we learned a lot, but we also learned that we don't know a lot. So I feel very confident the wines that we're going to bottle. And I also feel very confident in the vineyards that we decided not to make wine from. But a lot of it was just sensory analysis. I mean, you know when you've tasted those wines that were affected, and you would never want to serve that to a customer. So
Yeah.
those will turn into brandy somewhere.
Kind of very harsh licking an ashtray kind of flavor that is clearly grapes that have been affected. Jessica, did you, I know there were parts of Diamond Mountain that were very affected. When you drive to Schramsberg today, you can see, you have to drive by, sadly, some of those trees that were burned. How did you cope with the smoke taint issue?
I mean, we had done, because of the August fires, we had done, a little bit of, those trial fermentations, small batch fermentations, just to see, and couldn't, sensorially at least, couldn't find any of the ashy characters in those wines that we made. And so we decided to move forward from there. After the fires, because of the proximity and because of how long it had been, the hillsides were burning, the fires ran through some of our vineyards, burned some vines. So we decided that was probably not going to be an ideal picking situation. And so we decided just to call it there. By the time that we were able to get, a crew up to the site, that it was going to be another, week or two. So that just wasn't a tenable situation. And so we're just happy with what we got.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to dwell on smoke taint anymore. We're going to move on to the 2021 vintage. But let me do say that for anyone who's watching, if you are really interested in sort of a recap of what is known and what is not known about smoke taint, UC Davis has some great information. Just jump on the web and go to ucdavis.edu under industry information, and then wildfire impacts in California is a really good summary of what is known so far and what is not known. All right. And now we're going to go to 2021, because after 2020, I remember even standing in Sunshine Market, which is our local grocery store here in St. Helena. You know, people were just buzzing with anticipation and edginess. Everyone was, it seemed like, on the edge of their seat because it had been a really beautiful year, a big drought year, but there were no fires. And it seemed like everyone was just praying, let that stay that way. No fires. Excuse me, no fires, please. So when the grapes finally came in, I understand they were beautiful. Well, I saw them too. They looked like blueberries. Weston, tell us about what the 2021 vintage was like for you.
Yeah, it was really exciting. Is like you said, is emotional as well, because you only get to do this once a year, and when you have something that kind of messes up that a lot, really excited to get this going and do it again. So bringing all that cab was wonderful. There was a lot of tension. Just you kind of start thinking, your mind goes in different ways a little bit. It's like, well, okay, this fruit's pretty good. I could probably bring it in. Would I like to wait another week? Yeah, I might, or 5 days or something like that. I probably would, but you know what, folks, the sky is clear. Maybe we bring it in. How do you do this? We never really thought about it quite in those ways before, but ultimately you just say, you know what, we're in Napa. This is some of the best place in the world to make wine. We're going all the way. We're gonna make the best we can of every time. And but yeah, it was a lot of emotions for sure. A different way of going through a harvest. Not as much focused on the numbers and things like that, but on just the feel of everything. So
yeah. But intuition is really important. I mean, of course, science is important, but I don't know. I think intuition, you all must have very developed intuitions that you rely on at the same time. Marla, what was 2021 like for you, and how do you think the wines are going to turn out?
I felt like I was holding my breath the whole time, but excited at the same time. It started early. We didn't have a lot of water, so things accelerated really, really fast. So we really had to be on our toes and not miss the picks when they were ready, and bring stuff early, a lot earlier than we were anticipating. So, but once we started tasting the wines, and we were just so excited, and we continue to be excited as we continue to taste beautiful fruit, beautiful freshness, liveliness, good concentration. So, once we processed the last grapes, we could finally take a breath and feel like, okay, we can sleep good tonight. I think everyone just had this huge sigh of relief and just so a lot of excitement for what's to come.
I remember the air in 2021. It was just so pleasant out. It was really dry. I mean, it was, again, a drought year, a second big drought year in what is now being called a mega drought for California. So the crop is going to be very small, right? I'm told people were off 20 to 60%. I mean, making up for it perhaps in quality, but it's going to be a small crop, right, Andy?
Oh yeah. I mean, I had vineyards that were down 75%, and some were only down about 20%, but it's definitely small. But that just shows in the concentration of the wines. I mean, the wines are so dark and so aromatic, and it's funny, listening to what Weston said, I remember as a team, we were out there and we're normally like totally in tune as to when to harvest, and we were not in sync. And now that I realize, it probably had a lot to do with, like, in the back of our minds, we were thinking like, well, things could change at any minute. So we did actually end up harvesting some things on the earlier side from normal, and I'm really happy we did, because there's great concentration, but there's also just great kind of varietal definition and sense of place, and the wines are exciting. Yeah, there's not a lot of it, but it's going to be a good one.
Yeah. Jessica, talk to us for a second about this idea that Andy just mentioned of concentration, but freshness. Freshness in Cabernet in particular is really important. So picking even a little bit early might turn out to have been just the most perfect decision in order to capture that freshness. No?
Absolutely. You can pick sort of earlier and capture maybe more of those sort of varietal notes, the herbaceousness and that sort of crispness that Cabernet can have. You can wait a little, a few more days, and still have, the acidity and that freshness of fruit. Or you can wait, a week and perhaps that fruit starting to go a little even bolder and riper, right? And so if you have, all of those components, like on our estate, we have about 45 acres planted. We'll pick about 35 different times, which seems insane. But, to make each of those picking decisions based on where that block is at that moment, and to try to capture the purest fruit, but also have Cabernet taste like Cabernet, right? That's the ultimate goal. And not have it, lacking in acid, not having it lacking in fruit, but somewhere, in the middle. And hopefully at that,
Yeah.
platonic ideal.
Although ripeness is not a moment in time, right? It's a range.
Yeah.
It's a range of an idea that is partly an idea in each of your minds. It's always been, seemed to me unfortunate that we in the press talk about ripeness as if it is a single minute that everybody is aiming for, but it is most certainly not that. All right, we're going to taste these wines now. Before we do, let me take Frank's question here, which is back on smoke taint. So Frank, we are going to take this question from you, though, which is, he says, I've heard that smoke taint may not seem very apparent in the wine right after you make it, but that after the wine is bottled, it can appear years later. Anyone want to take that?
I'm going to take that one because I've done so much research and work on this. I just don't, I have read that in so many different places and no one can point to a wine as an example of this happening. And so I think, sure, there are maybe levels of smoke taint where it might express itself differently, but the enzymes in your mouth actually break down because what happens is those smoke volatile aromas are attached to sugars that are in the wine.
Right.
And once those break apart, then then they're volatile and you can taste them. But the enzymes that break those things apart are actually in your mouth. And so when you're tasting the wine, if you do it properly and you let it like open up, you'll get the smoke taint if it's in there. I just, I have yet to be shown a wine where that's the case. And so 10 years from now, I may be eating my words, but I'm going to say that I feel very confident that the wines we're showing are the way they're going to show in 10 years.
All right. You'll be drinking your words, but okay. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into the wines because we have 4 beautiful Premiere wines here. And we're going to start with Weston's 2019 Silver Ghost. Normally I would hold up all these bottles. I am going to hold up this bottle, but these are all samples, of course, because these are Premiere wines and Premiere lots about to be auctioned. So let's taste this. Each of you who has we all have all 4 wines, I guess is what I want to say here. So Weston, talk to us about what's in this lot.
Yeah, so what we have here, this is all Rutherford actually, is where this wine is from. 95% Cabernet Sauvignon, 5% Petite Bardot. Just a few different barrels that I really liked and got to play around with and put together. This one's been in bottle for a little while. I had a feeling I wanted to do a 2019 for this particular premiere. And so this one's been in bottle a little bit, your samples have. So it's kind of had time to really come together, but yeah, just some favorite barrels. Yeah, all east side part of Rutherford.
Rutherford, such a fabulous and old appellation within the Napa Valley. I was talking to a few winemakers a couple of weeks ago about Petite Bardot, because Petite Bardot is being used more and more in the Napa Valley. And it was described by one of these winemakers to me as being like the spackle in wine, which I thought was a great description. The idea that a small amount kind of knits together other flavors and other varieties in the wine, but that it had this capacity to sit and sink into a blend very easily and give that blend a kind of deliciousness. How do you describe Petite Bardot? I mean, why did you add 5%?
Well, I think the things that you said are right on. It can be like a little secret weapon in a wine. It really gives it focus to me. It kind of, the cab can build all around it. It can give some length to the nose, length to the palate, and a direction to the wine. And it doesn't take much. It usually doesn't take much, and it can change the wine dramatically. And if you got the right lots, I think it just can really amplify everything about it. It can be really, really nice.
Nice wine.
Thank you.
Want to comment on this?
It's delicious. I think it definitely has the richness you were talking about, but also that energy that I was talking about from the vintage, because it's got a deepness, but also like this beautiful aromatic lift to it. It's nice.
Right. I think some of that's from that Petite Bardot as well. I love what it can do. That kind of darker perfume notes that it'll add to a cab.
Energy is such an important concept in Cabernet. It is, and you can so feel it and sense it, that kind of, I call it a kind of lit from within quality, right? You can just, there's, unfortunately, for those of us who write about wine, it's so frustrating that there's no good language for this, except to say that the wine seems alive or seems to, as you say, have an energy. But it's any taster can taste that in a great wine. And Napa Valley is one of those places on the globe where Cabernet in particular can have this almost vibrational quality. It's just addictively wonderful. I love it.
Yeah, I agree.
Lovely wine.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to Jessica's wine. This is the Davies Cabernet, lot 25, it looks like, also a 2019 from Diamond Mountain. So Jessica, I want you to tell us about this wine, but I also want you to tell us how it is that a sparkling winemaker can also make excellent Cabernet. I mean, these are pretty far apart bookends of styles of wine.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see. I haven't always made sparkling wine. I started making sparkling wine straight out of school at Schramsberg, worked at a number of places making excellent Cabernets. So, this was not the first rodeo, so to speak. And so coming back to Davies, having the experience with the estate from my previous experience at Schramsberg, coming back and seeing the Davies vineyards more recently, as well as all of that other experience, it's definitely, I think you're more attuned from the sparkling wine side to acid and tannin balancing each other, because you don't necessarily have tannin in a sparkling wine. You have more phenolic character to balance out some of the acid and that bitterness, but there's not really tannin per se. And so if anything, it's made me more sensitive to tannins and tannin structure, and trying not to over extract, but to have enough that it's present now, is approachable now, but also enough that it's going to age for hopefully what is a lifetime, a long lifetime. And so in terms of that, I think that's really what it's come down to.
It's an important point, because this wine, which is a mountain wine, is not that old style, what used to be thought about Napa Valley mountain wines is that they were like mountain men or something. They were really hard and needed 10 years to even just relax themselves a little bit. But this is a very polished, beautiful wine.
Thank you. Yeah, everything we do is in the cellar at least, and even in the vineyard, is to try to, pick when the tannins are resolved, not to over extract, not to, overwork the wines in the cellar, and then to, put them to barrels that are going to embrace those tannins. We have, as you saw last night, so we were at a dinner last night, and more of our team, is female, and Jamie Davies, when, she was alive, her ideal style of a Cabernet was a little bit more elegant. And so we've done, in that image, we've tried to produce what is an elegant Cabernet.
All right. Well, it's very beautiful. Anyone want to speak to, except for Jessica, about her wine? For me, it has a lot of interesting spice notes as well, which I also find in Napa Cabernet, just these faint echoes of, I don't know if they're Asian spices or Turkish spices, but there's something in the background that often adds a kind of intellectual interest to Napa Cab, and I'm really getting that in your Premiere lot.
I'm getting a lot of graham cracker. I love it. It's got this really interesting spice, but it's almost like having a s'more by the campfire. Not that it has any fire to it, but it's really cool.
Yeah, some of the J. Davies Cab is some that stands out the most as just always having smooth, ripe tannin for me. I mean, it's just beautiful wine every time I've tasted it.
Yeah. I've sometimes said to students when I'm teaching that, tannin that's not perfect can have a kind of attractiveness, like Clint Eastwood with a 5 o'clock shadow, kind of attractive every now and then, but it is better to not be Clint Eastwood with a 5 o'clock shadow. So, all right. And Andy, you
Wow, on that note, I do have a little bit of a shadow, but
I know, I could see you came prepared for the video. I'm impressed. All right, we're going, yeah, what?
Are we going into my wine? I'll let you introduce it.
Yeah. All right. So this is an interesting lot. This is a 2020 lot, which you have done, Fabia, you and your wife, Annie, have done with Hourglass. So tell us about this wine and why you decided to do it together with Hourglass.
Well, it's funny. We were planning to do a 2020 lot already of our favorite barrel of Coonsville Cabernet Sauvignon. And Coonsville, if you don't know, is the very southeastern part of Napa Valley. And so, we had our time in the barrel, if you will, back in 2017, but 2020, we were pretty far away from the fires. And I really love a lot of the Coonsville wines that we made. And I got a phone call from Jeff Smith, who owns Hourglass, and he asked if we'd be interested in doing a joint lot. So the only grapes that they harvested that year was the Merlot from their Blue Line vineyard, which, I think several days after they harvested the grapes, they lost everything. If you haven't been there, it's the fire burned right through there. It's right next to Calistoga Ranch, which is now gone. But anyway, I love Jeff and Tony Biaggi, who makes the wines. And so we got together and blended up something, and this is it. So this is half Merlot from the Hourglass vineyard and half Coonsville Cabernet Sauvignon from the Meteor vineyard, which is a great vineyard on that 3rd Avenue corridor that we've been working with for, like 17 years now. So I love blending. I love Cabernet Sauvignon. Of course, we're in Napa Valley, but some of my favorite wines are wines that we blend from different varieties. So I love there's like a juicy blueberry quality that you get from the Merlot, and then the Coonsville Cab has this very dark, sort of savory tone to it. So I think when you put it together, I really like the way it works. It's unusual, but also just really, really nice.
Yeah, Coonsville, just to pick up on that for a moment, is a relatively recent, one of Napa Valley's more recent appellations. It is so striking if you are in the Napa Valley or if you're going to visit. it's really geology right in front of you, right? Because it's an ancient caldera. It was born of a huge explosion, and you can really feel that geology. And because you're in the southern end of Napa Valley, you can feel the weather is different as well. It's a little cooler, and it is overall not just weather-wise, it's kind of a cool place, socially, so to speak. And then Merlot, I have to say, in our office here, we taste about 2,500 wines a year. And a lot of those wines are California wines. When we get to Napa Valley Merlot is never wimpy. It is a structured big wine. It's kind of too bad that Merlot is sometimes thought of as somehow a spineless variety. Boy, not in Napa Valley. You get some real power behind Merlot. So it's a delicious wine.
Thank you.
Who else wants to jump in on this wine?
The blueberry really stands out. It's really beautiful. And I think it has a great freshness to it.
Yeah, I always get that blue fruit out of Meteor Vineyard. I love it. And it's a great vineyard. Having that Merlot in there with is really complimentary.
Yeah, blue is an interesting idea in fruit, right? Because it's I don't know if has to do with acidity, but to me, I always feel this like bounciness. It's like blueberries bouncing up and down or something. Blue fruit bounce. It's great. It's a part of that aliveness we were talking about earlier. All right, are we ready to, let's move on to Marla's wine, which is the Antinore Antica estate up on Atlas Peak. It's a 2021 vintage. And so this is the vintage that we're all so tremendously excited about. Let's give it a taste.
So this wine is obviously quite young. It's 50% Cabernet Franc off of the northern. So we're at the top of Atlas Peak. So all of our fruit is estate off of our property. We have 550 acres of vineyard planted up here. So we have now 30 acres of Cabernet Franc. So it's going to be a big part of our future going forward, which we're very excited about because we think it adds freshness and brightness and nuance to the Cab Sauv, which can sometimes just be really dense and chewy and rich. And so we like to add something that's kind of freshen it a little bit. And so the Cabernet Franc does that for us. The Cab Sauv in this blend, so it's 50% Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's barrel fermented, which is new for us. We haven't done it here before. So we actually pop the head off, fill the barrels. I know a lot of Napa wineries do a lot of it, but we haven't really done it before here. And I was struck by how quickly the wine tasted ready to drink. So I think that was the benefit of the barrel fermentation, was the tannins were already resolved. They were soft and supple. Whereas we did an experiment. We did the same Cab Sauv in tank, and it's much more of an age-worthy wine. And I think the wine that we barrel fermented just had fresh fruit and was just ready to drink right away. So it was really fun to present it as the Premiere lot and a blend with the Cabernet Franc. And we had 6 barrels that we barrel fermented. We ended up with 2 after we pressed and half a barrel. So it was perfect for this auction lot. So we just really liked the way it turned out.
Man, Cabernet Franc is such an interesting variety. I mean, first of all, it's Spanish, not from Bordeaux, right? Historically, it's native to the Basque region of Spain, and then traveled to Bordeaux. But it is the father of Cabernet Sauvignon, the father in quotes. And I've been struck in the last few years how, it's so finicky. It's a little bit like the Pinot Noir of the cab world. It either makes really beautiful wine or it really doesn't make anything at all. And when it's on, though, man, it is so delicious in the Napa Valley. And if you're thinking to yourself, not you, but if viewers are thinking, oh, Cabernet Franc, Loire, Napa Valley Cabernet Franc has absolutely zero to do with the Loire, in my opinion. It is not that light, leafy, violety, Chinon or Bourgogne style Cabernet Franc. It has real gravitas. At the same time, this sort of soprano lift to it. It's such an interesting variety. I bet you're very excited about it.
Definitely. Yeah. We bottled some 2019 for the first time on its own, which was really fun to get to have enough to do that.
Yeah.
Finally, so.
Andy, you've worked with Cabernet Franc a lot in the.
I have. I love it. It's my favorite variety that we grow in Napa Valley. And it's great that you equate it with Pinot Noir in terms of being finicky. It is very site specific. If you were to plant it on heavier soils, let's say in the middle of the valley, it's probably going to be very leafy and produce something very different from if you plant it, let's say, on the top of Atlas Peak or I love it in those eastern hills and those eastern mountains. It seems to thrive in those red soils, and it needs to be managed in a way where you can't have too much canopy. You have to crop it very reasonably, probably like 75% or less of what you'd do if it was Cabernet Sauvignon. And when you do that, you get these really compelling wines. I mean, very complex. I describe it as like Asian market spices. It can be very green, like the Loire Valley version, which is enjoyable. But in some of the wines in Saint-Emilion up on the plateau there's a heavy dose of Cabernet Franc, and those wines are really interesting. And I think in Napa we get a similar complexity and depth, and you have to be passionate about it to grow it because it's not easy. It doesn't yield a lot, but the results are great.
Yeah. And it is also, for the last few years, been, if you are buying fruit, the most expensive grape in the Napa Valley. That's like a good, I don't know, a trivia question, I guess. What's the most expensive grape in the Napa Valley? It's not Cabernet Sauvignon, it's Cabernet Franc. All right. Jessica or Weston, do you want to jump in on this 2021? I think we can see, if you were tasting this with us, how excited we all are about the 2021 vintage, because the balance in this wine, the juiciness, its forwardness, but its beautiful structure, it's just really all there. What a great vintage. We're so lucky to have.
Yeah, really alive.
This wine is really, really integrated. It's got a savory component to it that, I keep going back, and it keeps changing and evolving because it is so young. But it's beautifully made.
Weston, and what were you about to say?
And really alive. I mean, you could just, like you're talking about, the inner fire of it is great, and just that tension, and really once you want to take another sip, that's for sure.
You've given me a good idea. Inner fire is better than outer fire. Yeah. Okay, we're all agreed on that. Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. It's been really fun to taste these, for me anyway, to get this advanced look at some of these Premiere lots, and also to see how you all have done such an amazing job staying certainly on your toes over the last three vintages. Nobody was kind of asleep at the wheel on these three very different, very dramatic vintages, and three vintages that I think anyone who loves Cabernet will want to have tucked away in their cellars, or who knows what, in between the high heels in the closet. So, all right, everyone. Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you, Weston, Marla, Andy. Good luck with the auction over the next couple of days, and all of the great tastings that will happen. And cheers. Thanks for sharing these wines.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Bye, everyone.